Hungary, a nation sitting in the heart of Europe, surrounded by Slavic and Germanic neighbors, yet speaking a language that sounds like nothing else on the continent. A people who have held their identity fiercely across 1,000 years of invasion, occupation, and empire. Their sense of distinctiveness runs deep, and for good reason. But where do the Hungarians actually come from? Are they the direct descendants of nomadic horsemen who rode out of Central Asia and carved a kingdom from the European plains? Or is the genetic story far more complicated, shaped by layers of ancient European ancestry that predate the Magyars by thousands of years? Scientists have been wrestling with this question for decades. And now, ancient DNA is finally giving us answers. Some of them are genuinely shocking. In this video, we're going to trace the full genetic story of the Hungarian people. From the Ice Age hunter-gatherers who first walked these lands, through the extraordinary arrival of the Magyar conquerors in 895 CE, to a modern DNA picture that challenges everything popular history says about who Hungarians really are. Hungary is home to roughly 10 million people, most of them concentrated in the flat, fertile basin of the Carpathian region, one of the most strategically positioned pieces of land in all of Europe. The Carpathian Mountains curve around it to the north and east like a natural fortress wall. The Alps guard it to the west, and the great Danube cuts straight through its center. That geography made Hungary a destination, a crossroads, a prize. Peoples have been moving through and settling in this basin for as long as modern humans have existed in Europe. That's not incidental. It's the reason their DNA is so layered, so rich, and so contested. The broader Hungarian diaspora stretches across several continents, with significant communities in Romania, Slovakia, Serbia, the United States, and beyond. Estimates put the total number of ethnic Hungarians worldwide at somewhere between 13 and 15 million. The Hungarian language itself, spoken by perhaps 14 million people, is one of the most widely spoken non-Indo-European languages in Europe. Here's something that surprises a lot of people. Hungarians, on average, show a measurable genetic signal associated with East Asian and Siberian ancestry, a trace that links them, however faintly, to the nomadic world of the Eurasian steppe. How strong that signal is, who it actually came from, and what it tells us about the Magyar conquest, is exactly what the science has been untangling. And the answer is more nuanced than anyone expected. Hungarian belongs to the Uralic language family, specifically the Finno-Ugric branch, which makes it a linguistic relative of Finnish and Estonian, two languages spoken thousands of miles to the north. That connection isn't superficial. Linguists have traced it to a common ancestral language spoken somewhere in the forest zones east of the Ural Mountains, probably around 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. For most Europeans, discovering that Hungarian and Finnish share deep grammatical roots is like finding out two completely unrelated countries secretly speak dialects of the same ancient tongue. But here's what's interesting. Hungarian also absorbed a huge number of loanwords from Turkic languages, Persian, and even Iranian, reflecting centuries of close contact with the steppe world long before the Magyars ever reached Central Europe. The language is, in itself, a genetic map. It tells you where these people traveled, who they lived next to, and who they fought. But before we get to the DNA, we need to go back much further, to the people who were here first. After the last ice age, as the glaciers retreated from Central Europe around 12,000 years ago, the Carpathian Basin was repopulated by hunter-gatherers moving north and west across the warming continent. Ancient DNA recovered from sites in Hungary, including the remarkable Mesolithic burial site at Vaskapu Cave in the Hungarian highlands, shows these early inhabitants had dark skin, dark hair, and, in some individuals, the striking combination of lighter eyes that appears repeatedly in ancient European populations. They were skilled foragers who exploited the rivers, forests, and wetlands of the basin for thousands of years. They didn't survive the next wave unchanged. Starting around 6000 BCE, Neolithic farmers crossed into the Carpathian Basin from Anatolia, what is now Turkey, carrying with them domesticated wheat, cattle, pottery, and a genetic profile sharply different from the hunter-gatherers they encountered. These farmers settled the richest soils and multiplied rapidly. The linear band ceramic culture, one of the earliest farming traditions in Central Europe, left an extraordinary archaeological record across Hungary. Over generations, the farmer ancestry gradually came to dominate, with only a thin thread of the older hunter-gatherer population woven into the genetic mosaic that resulted. Then came the third wave. Between roughly 3000 and 2000 BCE, migrants associated with the Yamnaya culture of the Pontic steppe, the vast grasslands north of the Black Sea, pushed westward into Europe in one of the most consequential migrations in human history. They brought horses, wheeled vehicles, a Proto-Indo-European language, and the Y chromosome haplogroup R1a, which remains one of the most common paternal lineages in Hungary today. Steppe ancestry now makes up an estimated 20 to 30% of the modern Hungarian ancestral baseline. It shaped the population's physical profile, contributing to the lighter pigmentation and taller stature associated with many Central Europeans. That three-layer foundation, ancient hunter-gatherer, Neolithic Anatolian farmer, Bronze Age steppe herder, is the bedrock under everything that came later. And then, in 895 CE, something happened that changed everything. Or so the story goes. The Magyars arrived, a confederation of semi-nomadic tribes riding out of the western Eurasian steppe. They swept into the Carpathian Basin under the leadership of Arpad and established the kingdom that would become modern Hungary. Contemporaries were terrified of them. Their cavalry raids reached as far as France, Italy, and the Iberian Peninsula. The Catholic Church added a prayer against them. For centuries, Hungarian national identity was built on this moment, the founding myth of a warrior people from the East who conquered Europe and then became it. The history books said the Magyars replaced or absorbed the existing population entirely, stamping their steppe identity onto the genetic and cultural landscape of Central Europe. But when scientists looked at the DNA, they found something very different. A landmark 2022 study published in Current Biology, involving researchers from Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest and collaborators across Europe, sequenced ancient genomes from conquest-era Magyar burial sites across Hungary. The results were striking. The elite warriors buried with horses, weapons, and elaborate grave goods showed a clear East Asian and Siberian genetic signature, consistent with origins in the steppe region near the Ural Mountains. But the common population buried alongside them, the farmers, craftspeople, and townspeople, showed predominantly the older European ancestry already established in the basin for thousands of years. Here's the thing. The Magyars, who actually conquered the Carpathian Basin, were genetically a relatively small group of steppe elites. They imposed their language, their culture, and their political structures on a much larger existing European population. Within a few generations, intermarriage diluted the steppe genetic signal dramatically. The language survived and grew. The steppe DNA largely faded into the broader Central European baseline. And this is where it gets surprising. Modern Hungarians carry, on average, somewhere between 5 and 15% ancestry that traces to the Eastern steppe world. That's real, it's measurable, and it's meaningful. But it's a far smaller proportion than the founding myth of a conquering nomadic people would suggest. The Magyar conquest was a cultural and political revolution. Genetically, it was more of a ripple than a flood. What survived is extraordinary, though. That faint Eastern signal, those traces of Siberian and Inner Asian ancestry that show up in Hungarian genomes today, those are the direct genetic fingerprints of the founders. They rode into Europe over 1,000 years ago, and their DNA is still there. That's not a small detail. It's a remarkable thread of continuity across 11 centuries of history. So, What does a modern Hungarian's DNA actually look like? The majority, typically estimates range from 50 to 60%, traces back to the Neolithic Anatolian farming populations who entered Central Europe around 8,000 years ago. Bronze Age steppe ancestry, largely from the Yamnaya expansion, contributes another 20 to 30%. The ancient European hunter-gatherer baseline accounts for perhaps 10%. And on top of all of this, that smaller but distinct Eastern Eurasian signal, ranging from 5 to 15% in individuals, marks the Magyar inheritance. There's notable regional variation. Hungarians in the eastern Great Plain region, historically closer to the original roots of Magyar settlement, tend to show slightly higher proportions of steppe-associated ancestry than those in the more urbanized western regions near Vienna and the Austrian border. Hungarians living in communities in Transylvania, now part of Romania, sometimes show their own distinct genetic substructure, reflecting centuries of relative isolation and local intermixture. On the paternal line, R1a and R1b are the dominant Y chromosome haplogroups, consistent with the broad Central and Eastern European pattern. But a subset of Hungarian men, particularly in regions associated with elite medieval Magyar descent, carry haplogroup N, which traces directly to the Uralic and Siberian ancestral homeland. That haplogroup N is the clearest patrilineal link between modern Hungarians